The morning mist of October 3rd, 1884, clung to the Castilian hills like wool to a carter's fingers, and our falconer, for we shall not burden him with a name he never spoke aloud anyway, moved through it with the practiced silence of a man who had learned that birds trust quiet hands more than loud hearts. In the stone mews of the Duke's estate, 12 hunting birds stirred on their perches, each one a small sovereign of its own fierce world. He began, as he had begun each day for 25 years, with Esperanza. The gyr-falcon regarded him with eyes like polished obsidian, that particular intensity that made even brave men step back. "You see too much, old girl," he thought, though his lips barely moved. She was the Duke's favorite. 7 years of perfect obedience, never missing her mark, never failing to return. The morning feeding was a ritual older than memory. Quail meats, carefully weighed, offered on a gloved fist that had long ago ceased to feel the weight of the bird. The other hawks required attention too. The Duke's younger peregrine, nervous and quick. 3 Spanish sparrow hawks for smaller game. The ancient eagle that hadn't flown in 2 years, but whom the Duke insisted on keeping, sentiment overruling sense, as it often did with the old. Each bird had its temperament, its preferences, its particular way of tilting its head when displeased. Our falconer knew them all, better perhaps than he had known his own wife's moods in those 8 years before the fever took her. The door to the mews creaked. Needed oil, always needed oil, but he kept forgetting. And Isabel entered with an armload of freshly laundered hoods and jesses. 28 years old, the laundress moved with that particular efficiency of women who had learned to make themselves indispensable without being noticed. Her husband had died in a quarry accident 3 years past, leaving her with 2 children and a position at the castle that barely fed them all. "The leather seems softer this week," our falconer observed, running a hood between his fingers. It was the most he'd spoken to her in a month. "New soap from Toledo," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "With lavender." A pause, weighted with things unsaid. The children asked about the eagles. He almost smiled. Almost. "Eagles are patient hunters. Your children could learn from them." She left the clean equipment on the wooden bench, her fingers briefly brushing against a silver bell that had fallen from its hook. The touch was delicate, deliberate, like everything about her that he pretended not to notice. The narrator must tell you that he noticed everything, stored it away in that careful part of his mind where he kept things that couldn't be trusted. Not yet. By mid-morning, Carlos Fuentes had arrived, reeking of wine and tobacco, though it was barely past the 9th hour. The gamekeeper was 38, built like a wine barrel, with the kind of laugh that made nervous men check their purses. They'd been friends since Carlos arrived at the estate 15 years ago, and if the falconer noticed that his friend's hands shook more these days, that his jokes came too quick and too loud, well, he kept that observation where he kept all uncomfortable truths. "Strange business near the old monastery," Carlos said, leaning against the mews wall with studied casualness. "Lights at night where no lights should be. The shepherds won't take the flocks near there anymore." "Shepherds fear their own shadows when the wine runs dry." "Perhaps." Carlos picked at a splinter in the doorframe. "Or perhaps they see what city men miss. That place has been cursed since Brother Tomas hung himself from the bell tower in 1620. Even the Duke won't hunt those lands." Our falconer continued preparing the day's equipment, checking each jessie, each bell, each tiny buckle that could mean the difference between a returned bird and a lost one. He thought about the monastery, San Isidro, crumbling on the estate's eastern border. As a boy, he'd explored its ruins, found nothing but bat droppings and broken pottery. But that was 30 years ago. And time, as the narrator knows well, changes more than just stones. "The Duke hunts where he pleases," he said finally. "Next week we fly near the monastery. He wants to test the young peregrine on the autumn migration." Carlos made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something else. "I'd pay good money to see Esperanza fly those grounds. That bird has more sense than most Christians." The Duke's bell rang from the main house, 3 sharp pulls, the summons for the morning conference. Our falconer hung his leather apron on its hook, checked his appearance in the small warped mirror that reflected a face carved by wind and sun into something resembling old leather. 42 years had left their mark, lines around brown eyes that had watched countless hunts, hands scarred from talons and time, hair going gray at the temples like frost creeping across morning grass. Walking through the castle's lower corridors, he passed the usual morning traffic: scullery maids with their burden of water, stable boys smelling of horse and hay, the French chef arguing with the butler about the evening's menu. Each had their place in this grand mechanism, each their particular dance of deference and duty. Our falconer occupied that peculiar position of trusted servant, higher than most, lower than all who mattered, essential yet invisible. The Duke sat in his study, foot elevated on a cushioned stool, swollen with gout that no amount of mercury treatments seemed to ease. At 71, Don Alfonso de Mendoza remained sharp as the talons of his beloved birds, his mind compensating for what his body could no longer accomplish. Around him spread the accumulated treasures of a lifetime: maps of estates, books on natural philosophy, a telescope from London, and, somewhat incongruously, a photograph of a steam locomotive. "Progress," the Duke said without preamble, noticing his falconer's gaze. "The railway company wants to buy the eastern parcels, including the monastery lands. Your Grace considers selling? Stone is stone. Better it builds something new than rots in the rain." The Duke shifted, winced. "But first, one last season of hunting those grounds. Tradition before transformation, yes?" Our falconer bowed his agreement, though something in his chest tightened. Change came whether one invited it or not, like death, like love, like the turning of seasons that brought the birds south and then called them north again. He thought of the lights Carlos had mentioned, of shepherds and their fears, of stones that had stood for 300 years about to be torn down for progress. That evening, alone in his room above the mews, he could hear the birds settling for the night, each rustle and chirp a familiar note in a symphony he'd conducted for decades. Through his window, far to the east, the silhouette of San Isidro's remaining towers stood black against stars. No lights there now, just darkness and the weight of waiting. Tomorrow would bring what tomorrow brought. Tonight, there was only the sound of hunting birds dreaming of flight, and a man who trusted their dreams more than his own. 7 days had passed since Carlos mentioned the lights, and now, on October 10th, the Duke's hunting party assembled in the courtyard while frost still silvered the grass. Our falconer carried Esperanza on his gloved fist, her weight familiar as breathing, her white and gray plumage catching the early sun like new snow on old stone. The narrator must observe that there was something different in her grip that morning. Talons slightly tighter, head movements quicker, though only a man who'd carried her for 7 years would notice. The Duke rode in a specially fitted carriage now, his gout making horseback impossible. Behind him came the usual retinue, Don Fernando, his nephew from Madrid, eager to inherit and poor at hiding it. 2 local landowners hoping to curry favor. The Duke's physician with his bag of useless remedies, and bringing up the rear, Carlos with the dogs and spare equipment. A hunting party, the narrator notes, is never just about hunting. It's about displaying power, maintaining alliances, reminding everyone of the natural order of things. They traveled east, through olive groves older than memory, past the mill where the water ran low this autumn, through pastures where sheep lifted their heads to watch the procession pass. The monastery of San Isidro grew larger with each turn of the wheels, its broken tower reaching toward heaven like a beggar's hand. Our falconer walked alongside the Duke's carriage, Esperanza shifting her weight with each step, that ancient dance between bird and bearer that required trust on both sides. "The partridges are thick near the old well," the Duke called down. "We'll stalk there." The well stood perhaps 300 paces from the monastery walls, close enough to see the gaps where stones had fallen, the empty windows that looked like hollow eyes. The hunting parties spread out in practiced formation, while our falconer prepared Esperanza, removing her hood with the smooth motion of long practice. She blinked in the sudden light, ruffled her feathers, seemed to settle. Then she saw the monastery. The change was instantaneous. Her whole body went rigid, feathers flattening against her body, pupils dilating until her eyes were almost black. A sound came from her throat that our falconer had never heard in 25 years of working with raptors, something between a scream and a whimper. She baited, throwing herself off his fist with such violence that only his instinctive grip on her jesses kept her from escaping entirely. "Control your bird!" Don Fernando snapped, his horse shying at the commotion, but control was impossible. Esperanza beat her wings frantically, twisting in the air, trying to fly backward, away from the ruins. The falconer pulled her back to the glove, speaking in low, soothing tones that usually calmed any bird, but she wouldn't settle. Her breath came in rapid gasps, her heart visible beating beneath her breast feathers. She fixed her gaze on the monastery and mantled her wings, the defensive posture of a bird facing a mortal threat. "What's wrong with her?" The Duke's voice carried concern rather than anger. He knew this bird had flown her for years, trusted her courage against eagles twice her size. "I don't know, Your Grace. She's never..." A peasant woman gathering herbs nearby crossed herself. "The bird sees what we cannot," she whispered, loud enough for others to hear. "Brother Tomas walks those halls still, they say. Hung himself when the Inquisition came for him, but his spirit found no rest." "Superstitious nonsense," the physician declared, though the narrator notices he moved his horse further from the ruins as he spoke. Our falconer tried once more, walking closer to the monastery, speaking constantly to Esperanza. At 200 paces from the walls, she began trembling. At 150, she screamed again and nearly broke her own wing trying to escape. He retreated quickly, and only when they'd put 300 paces between themselves and the ruins did she begin to calm, though her eyes never left those broken walls. "Try the peregrine," the Duke ordered, his voice thoughtful rather than commanding. The younger bird flew normally at first, rising on the morning thermals in tight spirals. But when our falconer flushed a covey of partridges toward the monastery, the peregrine refused to follow. She circled back, landed on his fist without making any attempt at the hunt. The sparrowhawks behaved similarly, normal everywhere else, but refusing to fly within that invisible boundary around San Isidro. "Even the dogs won't track there," Carlos added quietly, indicating his hounds who sat at the edge of the safe zone, whining softly when encouraged forward. The Duke sat silent in his carriage for a long moment, studying the scene with those sharp eyes that had measured men and situations for 7 decades. "In all my years," he said finally, "I've never seen Esperanza show fear. Not of wolves, not of eagles, not even during that terrible storm 5 years past." Don Fernando laughed, the sound sharp and unpleasant. "You're not actually considering that this is supernatural. Birds are simply birds. Perhaps she's ill or smells something dead in the ruins." "Then go investigate, nephew," the Duke replied mildly. "Take the dogs and flush whatever game hides there." The younger man's face flushed, but he couldn't refuse the challenge without losing face. He rode toward the monastery with elaborate casualness, but at the same invisible line where the birds had balked, his stallion, a brave horse that had faced bulls in the ring, planted its hooves and refused to move. Don Fernando spurred hard, the horse reared, nearly throwing him, then backed away, snorting and trembling. "Enough," the Duke declared. "We hunt the western meadows today." The party moved away from San Isidro, and gradually the birds returned to normal. Esperanza took 3 rabbits with her usual precision, though our falconer noticed she kept positioning herself to keep the monastery in view, never turning her back on it completely. The rest of the hunt proceeded successfully, bags filled with partridge and hare, the dogs working well, conversations returning to normal topics, the price of wool, the new telegraph lines being strung toward Toledo, the constant question of rain. But during the midday meal, taken under ancient cork oaks, Father Miguel arrived on his stubborn mule. The priest, 55 and scholarly, had been summoned by someone, the narrator suspects the herb-gathering woman, and came prepared with his story. "Brother Tomas was no ordinary monk," he began without preamble, accepting a cup of wine from the Duke's own supply. "He studied texts the Church had forbidden, conducted experiments in natural philosophy that bordered on alchemy. When the Inquisition came in 1620, they say he'd been trying to communicate with angels through sounds beyond human hearing. Fairy tales to frighten children," the physician scoffed. "Perhaps," Father Miguel agreed. "But the monastery's records, those that survive, speak of strange occurrences even before his death. Animals fleeing the grounds, novices complaining of pressure in their ears, bells ringing without being touched." Our falconer listened while hooding Esperanza for the journey home. He thought of her terror, genuine and overwhelming, unlike anything he'd seen. Birds didn't imagine threats. They responded to real danger with instincts honed over millions of years. What could she sense that human perception missed? "I want that monastery searched," the Duke announced suddenly. "If someone or something has taken residence there, on my lands, I'll know of it." "I'll organize the gamekeeper and groundsman," Don Fernando offered, eager to redeem his earlier embarrassment. "No." The Duke's eyes found his falconer. "You'll go. Alone at first, to observe. You read the birds better than anyone, and they're telling us something. Find out what." The ride back to the castle was subdued. Esperanza sat hooded and quiet on our falconer's fist, but he could feel the tension in her feet, the slight tremor that hadn't quite ceased. As they passed through the main gates, Isabel was there with her children, bringing the day's cleaned linens to the main house. Her son, perhaps 8 years old, pointed at the birds with wonder, and his mother quickly pulled his hand down, teaching him the invisibility that meant survival in their world. That evening, our falconer sat in the mews long after the birds had settled to roost. He thought about fear and instinct, about Brother Tomas and his experiments with sounds beyond hearing, about the Duke's railway money and the stones of San Isidro. Somewhere in those ruins lay an answer, but finding it would mean trusting Esperanza's terror enough to face whatever had caused it. The narrator observes that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to act despite it, whether you're a bird diving at prey or a man walking toward a mystery. The 11th of October dawned gray and restless, with winds that made the weather vanes spin like dervishes, and our falconer stood in the courtyard with Esperanza, determined to understand her fear through repetition and observation. The Duke had given him 3 days before sending soldiers, 3 days to solve what superstition couldn't explain. The narrator must note that he approached this like he approached training a difficult bird, with patience, method, and careful attention to every small sign. He chose different approaches to the monastery throughout that first day. From the north, through the olive groves where ancient trees provided cover. Esperanza grew agitated at 400 paces. From the west, along the dry stream bed that ran toward the ruins. She began her distress calls at 350 paces. From the south, where the land rose slightly and gave a clear view of the broken tower, there she refused to fly at all, gripping his glove so tightly she drew blood through the leather. "The bird knows," old Joaquin the shepherd told him when they met near the boundary stones. "My grandfather saw lights in those ruins when he was a boy, and his grandfather before him. Some places belong to the dead." But our falconer had noticed something the shepherd missed. Esperanza's reaction was consistent with distance, not direction. Whatever frightened her seemed to radiate from a central point, like heat from a fire or sound from a bell. He made notes in his small leather journal, the one where he tracked molting patterns and hunting success, adding this mystery to years of careful observation. That evening, Father Miguel visited the mews, an unusual occurrence that meant the priest wanted something. He brought a bottle of good wine, not the vinegar the castle usually provided to servants, and they sat on wooden stools while the birds settled for the night. "You don't believe in the ghost," the priest observed, not a question. "I believe in what I can see. Esperanza sees something." Father Miguel poured the wine with steady hands, though the narrator notices he glanced repeatedly at the door, ensuring they were alone. "The monastery's library was famous once. Brother Tomas was brilliant, they say, before his mind turned. He studied the works of Aristotle, of the Arab scholars, even obtained texts from the Far East through merchants in Seville. Knowledge is dangerous. The wrong knowledge sought for the wrong reasons." The priest drank deeply. He became obsessed with the idea that angels spoke in frequencies man couldn't hear, that divine communication existed just beyond our perception. The other monks reported strange experiments, vessels of water that rippled without being touched, wine glasses that shattered without cause. Our falconer thought of Esperanza's terror, her dilated pupils, the way she'd tried to fly backward. And the Inquisition came for him. They came, but found only his body hanging from a rope. The other monks had fled. The place was abandoned within a week and has remained so since. Father Miguel stood to leave, then paused. Be careful, my friend. Some mysteries are better left undisturbed. The 12th of October brought Carlos to the mews before dawn, drunk enough that his words slurred, but not so drunk he couldn't walk. The gamekeeper's degradation had accelerated these past months, the narrator observes, like a wheel rolling downhill, gathering speed toward an inevitable crash. I need money, he said without preamble. Just a loan. I'll repay it after the harvest taxes come in. The harvest taxes you already spent in Toledo? Our falconer continued preparing the morning feeds, not meeting his friend's bloodshot eyes. On cards or dice this time? Does it matter? Carlos slumped against the wall. They're threatening to tell the Duke. I'll lose my position, my cottage. Where would I go? I'm 38 years old with no trade but tracking game and drinking wine. The falconer wanted to help. The narrator can see it in the way his hands paused over the meat bucket, the slight softening around his eyes. But he'd learned that helping Carlos was like pouring water into a broken jar. No matter how much you gave, it was never enough. I have 20 reales saved. You can have half. 10 reales? Carlos laughed bitterly. They want 200 by month's end. Then you'd better stop gambling. Carlos left without another word, but the damage lingered in the air like the smell of sour wine. Our falconer tried to focus on his work, but worry gnawed at him. A desperate man makes poor choices, and Carlos knew too many of the estate's secrets to be trusted in desperation. The 13th of October, the third day of testing, brought an unexpected complication. Isabel's son had fallen ill with a fever that wouldn't break, and she hadn't appeared with the morning linens. Our falconer learned this from the kitchen gossip as he collected meat for the birds. The boy needed medicine from the apothecary in town, expensive medicine that a laundress couldn't afford. He found himself at the apothecary that afternoon, claiming to need powder for treating bird wounds. While there, he paid for the boy's medicine too, instructing the shopkeeper to tell Isabel it was charity from the church. 15 reales, most of what he had left after giving Carlos 10. But the narrator observes that some expenses feel lighter than others, despite their weight in coin. That evening, he made one final attempt with Esperanza at dusk, when hunting birds were often calmest. He approached the monastery from the old Roman road, unused for decades and overgrown with brambles. She lasted longest this way, allowing him to reach nearly 300 paces from the walls before beginning her distress. In the fading light, he could swear he saw movement in one of the upper windows, just a flash of something pale. But when he looked directly, nothing was there. Walking back through the darkening olive groves, Esperanza finally calm on his fist, he made his decision. Tomorrow he would go to the ruins alone, without the birds, and discover what they sensed but couldn't explain. The Duke expected answers, and our falconer had learned long ago that the powerful don't accept failure, regardless of its cause. That night, unable to sleep, he stood at his window watching clouds obscure the stars. In the distance, exactly where the monastery should be, he thought he saw a faint glow, like a candle behind thick glass. It lasted only moments before disappearing, but it was enough. Whatever haunted San Isidro wasn't supernatural. Ghosts didn't need candles. The narrator must observe that our falconer felt a peculiar relief at this realization. Men he could understand, could predict, could potentially outwit. The motivations of the living were always simpler than the mysteries of the dead. Greed, fear, desire, survival. Someone was using the monastery for purposes that required solitude, and they'd found a way to ensure that solitude by terrifying both animals and men. He prepared his equipment carefully: a sharp knife, a coil of rope, a small lantern with a good oil supply, and the leather journal where he recorded his observations. He also included something unusual: a silk scarf that had belonged to his late wife, still faintly scented with lavender. He'd kept it all these years for reasons he couldn't articulate, but tomorrow felt like a day for talismans, even for a man who didn't believe in them. Below in the mews, the birds were restless, sensing the approaching storm that would arrive by morning. Esperanza called once, a long, low note that sounded almost like a warning. Our falconer listened to her, to all of them, these creatures that had taught him more about trust than any human ever had. Tomorrow, he would trust their instincts by investigating what frightened them, and perhaps in understanding their fear, he'd find a truth worth more than any ghost story. Dawn on October 14th came wrapped in mist thick as wool, and our falconer moved through it toward San Isidro with the deliberate pace of a man who'd learned that haste makes you miss the important details. He'd left before the castle stirred, telling no one of his plans, carrying his small collection of tools and that silk scarf that seemed foolish now in the gray morning light. The narrator observes that he chose this early hour deliberately. Whoever used the monastery would likely be sleeping after their nighttime activities. The approach from the old Roman road proved wisest. The brambles that choked it provided cover, and the ancient stones muffled footsteps better than the gravel paths elsewhere. At 300 paces from the ruins, he stopped, remembering Esperanza's panic at this distance. Nothing seemed unusual. No sounds, no smells, no visible movement. Yet the morning birds that should have been singing were silent, and that silence spread around the monastery like spilled oil. He continued forward, each step careful and considered. At 200 paces, he felt it, a pressure in his ears, subtle but undeniable, like the feeling before a thunderstorm, but different, thinner somehow. At 100 paces, the pressure became almost painful, a high whining just at the edge of perception. Not quite sound, but the ghost of sound, the suggestion of a scream pitched too high for human ears to properly hear. The main entrance had collapsed decades ago, stones scattered like broken teeth. But our falconer knew these ruins from boyhood explorations, knew the servants' entrance on the north side where kitchen staff once carried supplies. The wooden door had long since rotted away, leaving an opening barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Fresh scratches on the stones caught his attention. Someone had widened this entrance recently. Inside, the monastery held that peculiar quality of abandoned sacred spaces, where echoes seemed to linger longer than they should. Pale light filtered through gaps in the roof, illuminating patches of floor where weeds pushed through cracked tiles. But there, in the dust, wheel tracks, fresh ones, no more than a day old, leading toward the crypt stairs. The narrator must tell you that our falconer's heartbeat quickened, but his hands remained steady. Years of handling nervous raptors had taught him to control his body's reactions, to project calm even when feeling none. He followed the tracks, noting how they'd been partially swept but carelessly, leaving enough trace for trained eyes to follow. The crypt stairs descended into darkness that seemed solid as stone. His small lantern pushed it back reluctantly, revealing walls where moisture had traced patterns like old maps. Halfway down, He stopped. Voices, faint but unmistakable, speaking in low tones somewhere below. Not Latin or Castilian, something harsher, more guttural. German, perhaps, or Dutch. He extinguished his lantern and continued in darkness, one hand on the damp wall, counting steps to track his position. The voices grew clearer, and with them came other sounds, a rhythmic, mechanical noise like a press or pump, and beneath it all, that high whine that made his teeth ache. Light appeared ahead, seeping around a corner. Our falconer crept forward until he could peer into the crypt proper. What he saw there made him forget, momentarily, all his careful control. The crypt had been transformed into a workshop. 3 printing presses stood where monks once lay in eternal rest, their copper plates gleaming in the light of several oil lamps. Stacks of paper filled one corner, and finished products, what looked like government tax stamps and currency notes, dried on lines strung between pillars. 2 men worked the presses while a third, older and wearing spectacles, examined finished bills with a magnifying lens. But what drew his attention most were the devices mounted on small platforms around the room's perimeter. Metal cylinders with hand cranks, each topped with what appeared to be a whistle or pipe. One was operating, its crank turning slowly by means of a clockwork mechanism. And though it produced no sound he could properly hear, that terrible pressure in his ears intensified whenever he looked directly at it. The man with spectacles spoke in accented Spanish. "The Galton principle works perfectly. No human hears it properly, but animals flee in terror. Better than guards, better than walls." Our falconer retreated carefully, memorizing every detail. He needed evidence, something concrete to show the Duke. Near the entrance to the stairs, Providence provided. A small metal whistle had fallen behind a broken statue, likely dropped by someone in haste. He pocketed it quickly and made his way back toward daylight. But at the top of the stairs, disaster waited. A 4th man stood there, younger, holding a pistol with casual competence. "Lost, are we?" he asked in perfect Castilian. "Looking for a lost hawk," our falconer replied, keeping his voice steady despite the weapon aimed at his chest. "The Duke's favorite. She flew this way yesterday." "No birds here." The man's smile was unpleasant. "They don't like the atmosphere." "So I perceive." Our falconer moved his hand slowly to his belt, as if adjusting it, letting the morning light catch the Duke's seal on the ring he wore for official hunts. "I'll tell His Grace the bird is truly lost, then." The man's eyes fixed on the seal, calculating rapidly. Killing a peasant was one thing, but murdering the Duke's personal falconer would bring investigations, soldiers, attention they clearly couldn't afford. "You saw nothing here but ruins and rats." "Ruins and rats," our falconer agreed, backing away slowly. "Nothing worth mentioning." He walked away with measured steps, feeling the pistol's aim between his shoulder blades until the brambles provided cover. Only then did he run, moving through paths he'd known since childhood, taking a circuitous route that would confuse any pursuit. His hand was bleeding. He hadn't noticed catching it on something sharp in the crypt, but the pain felt distant, unimportant compared to what he'd discovered. By the time he reached the castle, the morning was fully established, servants busy with their daily routines. Isabel stood in the courtyard, and the relief on her face when she saw him was quickly hidden behind proper deference. She noticed his bleeding hand immediately. "You're hurt. A scratch from brambles. Nothing more." But she was already pulling him toward the small room where hunting injuries were treated, her touch gentle but insistent. As she cleaned the wound with wine that stung like conscience, she spoke quietly. "My son's fever broke. The medicine from the apothecary worked. The priest said it was church charity, but the apothecary's wife gossips. She said a man bought it, someone who works with birds. Gossips invent stories to make their lives interesting." Isabel wrapped his hand with clean linen, her fingers lingering a moment longer than necessary. "Some stories are worth believing." The narrator observes that something passed between them then, fragile as spider silk and just as strong, an understanding that neither could afford to acknowledge fully, not yet. She returned to her duties, and he to his, but the warmth of her touch remained like a promise. In the mews, he examined the metal whistle he'd taken. It was precisely crafted, with adjustments for pitch and volume marked in tiny German letters. When he blew it, no sound emerged that he could hear, but every bird in the mews reacted instantly, mantling, calling, some trying to break their jesses in panic. He stopped immediately, soothing them with familiar words and gestures, but the discovery confirmed his suspicions. Someone had weaponized Francis Galton's ultrasonic whistle, that device the English scientist had created to test the upper limits of hearing. But these weren't scientists seeking knowledge. They were criminals, using science to guard their counterfeiting operation, creating a barrier of sound that only animals could properly perceive. The narrator notes the irony. They'd created a very real ghost from purely material means, a haunting built from frequencies and fear rather than supernatural forces. The Duke's library occupied the castle's west tower. 3 floors of books accumulated over centuries, most never read, existing more as symbols of power than sources of knowledge. Our falconer climbed the narrow stairs on October 15th, carrying the German whistle wrapped in cloth, his mind turning over the problem like a horse working a mill wheel. The Duke had given him permission to research, though the old man's eyes had sharpened dangerously when told of armed men in the monastery ruins. "Research first," the Duke had commanded, "then we act with precision. I won't have it said I sent soldiers after shadows and gossip." The narrator observes that our falconer moved through the library with the same careful attention he gave to tracking wounded prey. He couldn't read Latin or Greek, those languages of educated men, but he could manage Spanish and some Italian, and the library contained translations of many important works. More importantly, it held the Duke's collection of modern scientific journals, purchased more for prestige than perusal. On the second day of searching, October 16th, he found what he sought: a translated article about Francis Galton's experiments, published just 8 years prior, in 1876. The English scientist had created whistles that produced sounds above human hearing, testing them on various animals at the London Zoo. Dogs, cats, and small mammals reacted strongly, horses less so. Birds, with their acute hearing adapted for communication across great distances, showed the most extreme responses. He tested this systematically in the mews, using the captured whistle at different settings. The results were consistent. Raptors showed distress at settings that left the castle's dogs merely uneasy. At the highest pitch, even the ancient eagle, nearly deaf with age, shifted uncomfortably on his perch. Our falconer made careful notes, creating a map of suffering measured in frequencies no human could properly hear. On October 17th, Carlos appeared at the library door, swaying slightly, smelling of cheap wine and desperation. The gamekeeper had grown gaunt these past days, his usual bluster replaced by something raw and frightened. "They've given me another week," he said without preamble. "After that, they go to the Duke." "Who are they, Carlos?" But his friend just shook his head, eyes darting to the door as if expecting listeners. "People who don't forgive debts. People with connections in Toledo and Madrid." He noticed the scientific journals spread on the table. "What are you reading?" "Research for the Duke, about sound and hearing." Carlos laughed, bitter as wormwood. "While you study books, I'm drowning." 25 years of friendship, and you offer me 10 reales? The narrator must note that our falconer wanted to explain about Isabel's son, about the medicine that had cost his savings, but kindness performed in shadow loses its meaning when dragged into light. "I gave what I could." "You gave what was easy." Carlos turned to leave, then paused. "Be careful with your research. Some men in Toledo mentioned the monastery, said it's become valuable recently, not for its stones." After Carlos left, our falconer pondered this warning. The counterfeiters must have connections reaching into the city's gambling dens and taverns, places where desperate men gathered and information flowed like spilled wine. If Carlos owed money to people connected with the monastery operation, then his friend was in more danger than he knew. October 18th brought unexpected assistance. The Duke's physician, Dr. Marquez, approached him in the courtyard, carrying a leather case of medical instruments. "His Grace tells me you're investigating sound beyond hearing," the doctor said, his usual skepticism replaced by curiosity. "I studied such phenomena in Barcelona. The human ear is a marvel, but limited. Here." He produced a set of tuning forks, each precisely calibrated. "Strike these near your birds. Note their reactions at different frequencies." They spent the afternoon experimenting, creating a symphony of suffering that only the animals could hear. The results were undeniable. Certain frequencies caused immediate distress, others mere discomfort. The German whistle operated at the worst possible pitch for avian ears, a tone that must feel like needles in their minds. "It's brilliant, actually," Dr. Marquez admitted grudgingly. "Whoever designed this understood comparative anatomy better than most physicians." That evening, October 19th, our falconer sat with Isabel in the kitchen garden while her children helped the cook gather late herbs. Her son had fully recovered, running between the rosemary bushes with the energy of health restored. She mended a hunting hood while he adjusted Jess's, their work companionable in its silence. "You're troubled," she observed, not looking up from her needle. "The Duke asks me to solve a mystery that grows more complex each day. My grandmother used to say that complex knots often have simple solutions. You just need to find the right thread to pull." The narrator observes that wisdom often comes from unexpected sources, wrapped in the plain cloth of common sense, rather than the silk of education. Our falconer thought about threads. The counterfeiters, the ultrasonic devices, Carlos's debts, the railway company wanting to buy the monastery lands. Somewhere among these strands lay the one that would unravel everything. On October 20th, he made a disturbing discovery. In a recent scientific journal from Paris, an article described how ultrasonic frequencies could be used to affect not just animals, but humans, causing headaches, nausea, and disorientation at prolonged exposure. The monastery's reputation for being cursed might have originated from centuries of natural ultrasonic phenomena. Wind through particular stone formations, creating frequencies that disturbed both man and beast. The counterfeiters had simply amplified what nature already provided. He brought his findings to the Duke that evening, laying out the whistles, the journals, his careful notes. The old man listened with the patience of someone who'd learned that rushing to judgment often meant arriving at the wrong destination. So they guard their operation with science rather than swords, the Duke mused. How very modern. And they've been there how long? Weeks, perhaps months. The wheel tracks suggest regular traffic, but carefully timed to avoid observation. And your friend Carlos? Where does he fit? Our falconer hesitated, loyalty warring with duty. He knows something, Your Grace. His debts may have made him vulnerable to their influence. The Duke's fingers drummed on his chair arm, a rhythm like rain on stone. We need more evidence, documents, samples of their work. Can you get them? The man with the pistol saw my face. They'll be watching now. Then we wait. Let them think they've frightened you off. Meanwhile, continue your research. Learn everything about these devices, how they work, how to counter them. Knowledge, my dear falconer, is the sharpest weapon we possess. Returning to his room above the mews, our falconer found a note slipped under his door, written in a crude hand. Stop looking, or the birds burn. He crumpled it slowly, thinking of Esperanza, of all his charges who depended on him for protection. The threat was clear. Continue investigating, and they'd destroy what he loved most. But the narrator knows our falconer well by now, knows that threats against his birds would only strengthen his resolve. These criminals had made a fundamental error in judgment, mistaking his quiet manner for weakness, his careful nature for cowardice. They didn't understand that a man who'd spent his life training predators had learned patience from hawks and cunning from eagles. 3 nights of watching had taught our falconer the patterns of darkness around San Isidro, when clouds obscured the moon, when the wind covered sound, when human vigilance naturally weakened. Now, on the night of October 21st, he crouched in the hollow of an ancient oak tree, wrapped in dark wool that made him part of the shadows, observing the monastery through a small spyglass borrowed from the Duke's collection. The narrator must explain that he'd changed his approach after finding the threat against his birds. Instead of direct investigation, he became what he'd always been, a patient hunter, learning his prey's habits before striking. Each night from different positions, always downwind, always mindful of the ultrasonic barriers that created an invisible wall around the ruins. At 2 hours past midnight, a covered wagon approached from the Toledo road, wheels muffled with rags, pulled by 2 mules trained to silence. 3 men emerged from the monastery to meet it. The young one with the pistol, another built like a wine barrel, and the older man with spectacles, whom our falconer now knew to be Johannes Kraft, the German engineer whose name he'd found in one of the scientific journals, cited for his work on acoustic instruments. They unloaded supplies quickly, more paper, bottles of chemicals, sacks that might contain food or might contain something else. The conversation carried in fragments on the night wind, mixing German, Spanish, and what sounded like Portuguese. One phrase reached him clearly. 3 more weeks, then we moved to Seville. On October 22nd, he watched Carlos approach the monastery at dusk, moving with the furtive gait of a man who wished himself elsewhere. The meeting was brief. Carlos handed over a leather satchel and received what looked like a small purse in return. The gamekeeper left quickly, but not before our falconer saw his face in the lantern light, etched with self-loathing sharp as any blade. That same night, near dawn, he witnessed something that changed his understanding of the operation's scope. A well-dressed man arrived on horseback, his bearing military despite civilian clothes. Kraft himself came out to greet him, and they talked for nearly an hour, examining samples of currency by lamplight. The visitor left with a substantial package, and our falconer recognized him as he passed. Major Delgado, aide to the provincial governor, a man whose signature appeared on tax documents throughout Castile. October 23rd brought rain that turned the world to mud and muffled sound better than any cloth. Our falconer used this cover to approach closer than ever before, reaching the monastery's outer wall despite the painful pressure in his ears from the ultrasonic devices. Through a gap in the stones, he could see into the courtyard where they'd established a routine: printing at night, drying and cutting during the day, packaging for distribution at dusk. The scale was staggering. Not just currency, but government bonds, tax stamps, official seals, everything needed to drain the province's wealth while appearing legitimate. He counted at least 50,000 reals worth of false notes drying on the lines, and that was likely one night's work. Returning through the rain, he found Isabel waiting in the mews with heated wine and dry clothes, her presence as unexpected as summer snow. "You've been going out at night. The whole castle knows, even if they don't know where." "The Duke's business requires it." She handed him the wine, her fingers brushing his with deliberate care. "My husband was a gambler too, before the accident. He'd disappear for days, return with either gold or bruises, never anything between. I learned to read the signs of dangerous business." "This isn't gambling." "No," she agreed. "It's worse. Gamblers only risk themselves." The narrator observes how she moved around the mews with easy familiarity, checking on each bird, knowing which ones accepted strangers and which would bait at unfamiliar presence. She'd been watching him as carefully as he'd been watching the monastery, learning his patterns, his preferences, the way he valued these creatures above his own comfort. October 24th brought an unexpected complication. The Duke summoned him at midday, and in the study stood Don Fernando, the nephew, holding one of the counterfeit notes with triumph written across his narrow face. "I found this in the marketplace," he announced. "The merchant couldn't explain where it came from, only that it was perfect, except for one tiny flaw in the watermark. There are forgers operating in the province, Uncle. We should alert the authorities immediately." The Duke's eyes found his falconer. "What do you think?" Our falconer examined the note carefully, recognizing Kraft's meticulous work, the same printing he'd seen in the monastery. "Alerting the authorities might warn the criminals, Your Grace. They could disappear before we locate their workshop." "You think you know where they are?" Don Fernando's tone dripped skepticism. "I suspect." The Duke raised one hand, ending debate. 3 more days. If my falconer hasn't found proof by then, we involve the provincial governor. The narrator notes the trap in this. If Major Delgado was involved, alerting the governor would be alerting the criminals themselves. But our falconer couldn't reveal this without explaining his midnight surveillance, which would expose Carlos's involvement and lead to questions he couldn't answer without destroying his friend completely. That evening, he made a decision that went against 25 years of solitary self-reliance. He found Carlos in his cottage, drunk but not insensible, staring at nothing with the hollow eyes of a man measuring the distance to his own grave. "I know about the monastery," our falconer said quietly. "I know what you're doing." Carlos didn't deny it, didn't even seem surprised. "They own me now. Started with just information, which roads the Duke's men patrol, when the garrison changes guard, then packages to deliver. Now I'm so deep that refusing means a knife in the dark. There's always a choice." Easy words from a man with clean hands. Carlos poured another cup of wine with shaking fingers. "They pay well, enough to clear my debts and more. But the money burns like acid. I can't sleep, can't eat. Even this wine tastes like shame." "Help me stop them." "They'll kill us both." "They're leaving in 3 weeks anyway. Help me, and the Duke might show mercy." Carlos laughed, bitter and broken. "Mercy? For betraying his trust? You don't know the powerful like I do. They forgive incompetence sometimes, never betrayal." Our falconer played his last card, the one he'd held in reserve. "Isabel's children play near the monastery sometimes, gathering herbs with their mother. If something goes wrong, if the criminals panic." The change in Carlos was immediate, his drunken slouch straightening. Despite his degradation, the gamekeeper had always been protective of women and children, a remnant of honor that even debt couldn't destroy. "You fight dirty for a man of principle. I fight to win, like you taught me when we were younger." Carlos stood slowly, swaying but determined. "What do you need?" "Information, schedule, numbers, and when the time comes, a way to disable those ultrasonic devices. Kraft keeps them running constantly now, powered by a water wheel they've rigged in the crypt. The frequency is painful for humans up close. I've vomited twice just delivering packages." They talked until midnight, planning carefully, each detail examined and re-examined. The narrator observes that redemption often begins not with grand gestures, but with small choices, each one building toward a moment when a man must decide who he truly wants to be. The morning of October 24th found our falconer in the castle's small chapel, not praying, but thinking in that peculiar clarity that sacred spaces sometimes provide, even to those who've lost their faith. He spread Carlos's information across a prayer bench, delivery schedules, guard rotations, the names of everyone involved. The network was larger than expected, reaching into Toledo's government offices, the garrison, even the railway company that wanted the monastery lands cleared of their valuable occupants before purchase. The narrator observes that he faced a chess problem with living pieces, each move potentially fatal if miscalculated. Major Delgado's involvement meant the provincial authorities were compromised. The local garrison commander took orders from Delgado. Even sending a message to Madrid would require passing through hands that might belong to the conspiracy. But there was one piece on the board that answered to no one but God and the Duke, Father Miguel, whose dislike of corruption was matched only by his love of theological debate. Our falconer found him that afternoon teaching Latin to reluctant village boys, his patience wearing thin as they mangled Cicero. "I need your help, Father, not your blessing, your active assistance." The priest dismissed the boys, who fled like sparrows from a hawk. "This concerns the monastery?" It concerns counterfeiters using science to simulate the supernatural, corrupting officials, and threatening innocents. Father Miguel's face darkened. I suspected something when Major Delgado began attending confession monthly, but never taking communion. Guilt without repentance is a heavy burden. He paused, considering. What do you need? A trustworthy messenger to reach the Duke's cousin in Segovia. General Martinez commands the military district there. He and Delgado despise each other. My nephew rides to Segovia tomorrow with church correspondence. A sealed letter could be included. That evening, October 25th, our falconer wrote carefully in his best hand, laying out the conspiracy with the precision of a hunt plan. He included sketches of the ultrasonic devices, samples of the counterfeit notes Carlos had provided, and most importantly, the date of the next major delivery, October 27th, when buyers from 3 provinces would gather at the monastery to collect their false government bonds. He sealed the letter with wax and the Duke's signet ring, borrowed for this purpose, then added his own mark, a small feather pressed into the warm wax, the sign of his trade that would tell General Martinez this came from someone who served loyally, if humbly. That night, unable to sleep, he made his rounds of the mews, checking each bird, finding comfort in their familiar sounds and smells. Isabel found him there, as he'd somehow known she would, carrying bread and cheese from the kitchen. "You're planning something dangerous," she said without preamble. "Something necessary." She sat beside him on the bench where they'd shared so many quiet moments these past weeks. "My husband died because he couldn't distinguish between necessary and prideful. Don't make me explain to my children why the man who saved their brother's life disappeared one night and never returned." "I'm not a gambler." "No," she agreed. "You're something worse. A man with principles. They die just as frequently, but with less warning." The narrator must note how she leaned against him then, just slightly, the warmth of her shoulder pressing through rough wool. It was the first deliberate contact between them that couldn't be explained as accidental, a crossing of boundaries as dangerous in its way as anything he planned for the monastery. October 26th brought Carlos to the mews before dawn, sober for once, carrying a heavy sack. "The water wheel that powers their devices," he said quietly. "I've loosened key bolts. One good pull on this rope when I'm near it, and the whole mechanism fails. You'll have maybe 10 minutes before they realize and switch to hand cranking the individual units." 10 minutes isn't much time. It's what I can give. That and this. He produced a rough map of the monastery's interior, marked with positions and guard schedules. "Rodrigo Salamanca, the engraver? He's weak. Took this job for money to pay for his mother's care in Madrid. He might turn if offered clemency." They went over the plan repeatedly, adjusting for contingencies. Carlos would be inside during the October 27th gathering, ostensibly delivering wine for the buyers. When the devices failed, our falconer would enter with the evidence needed to prove what was happening. The Duke's men would be positioned nearby, waiting for a signal. "What signal?" Carlos asked. Our falconer produced Esperanza's hunting hood, modified with small silver bells. "I'll release this from the tower. The bells will carry on the night wind, and any hunter will recognize their meaning. The prey is flushed. Time to strike." That afternoon he found the Duke in his study, weaker than usual, his gout flaring with the autumn damp. The old man listened to the plan with closed eyes, fingers steepled, breathing so shallow that someone might think him asleep. "You're gambling everything on General Martinez responding to your letter," he said finally. "What if he doesn't?" "Then we proceed with your guards alone, Your Grace." 6 men against perhaps 20. "Those aren't odds I like. 7 men, our Falconer corrected. Carlos will fight from inside once committed." The Duke opened his eyes, sharp as ever despite his body's deterioration. "You trust him after his betrayal?" "I trust his desire for redemption. It's stronger than gold and more reliable than fear." "And the girl? The laundress? She factors into this somehow, I can tell." Our Falconer felt heat rise in his face but kept his voice steady. "She watches my back, Your Grace. Everyone needs someone they trust without reservation." "Indeed," the Duke smiled, an expression rare as summer snow. "Very well. Tomorrow night we finish this. Success or failure, at least that damned bird of mine will hunt again without terror." That evening, our Falconer prepared meticulously. He sharpened his knife, though he hoped not to need it, checked every stitch in his dark clothing, practiced moving silently across the wooden floor of his room until he could cross it without a single board creaking. The narrator observes that ritual before danger serves the same purpose as prayer. It focuses the mind and calms the spirit. He went to the Muse for what might be the last time, spending extra moments with Esperanza, running his fingers through her breast feathers, feeling her heartbeat strong and steady beneath. "Tomorrow you'll be free of fear," he promised her, one way or another. A knock at his door interrupted Isabel with her children, bringing what she claimed were mended jesses, but what was really an excuse for goodbye. Her son, recovered and energetic, peppered him with questions about the eagles, while her daughter, shy and observant, drew pictures of the birds in charcoal on precious paper he'd given her. "Will you tell them stories of the hunt when they're older?" Isabel asked quietly, while the children were distracted. "If I'm here to tell them." She touched his scarred hand briefly, a butterfly landing and lifting away. "You'll be here. Men who are careful enough to keep hunting birds for 25 years don't die from one night's adventure." After they left, he stood at his window watching the monastery in the distance. No lights visible tonight. They were being careful too, preparing for tomorrow's gathering. The narrator knows that somewhere in those ruins, Johannes Kraft was checking his devices, Rodrigo Salamanca was preparing his finest forgeries, and men throughout the province were counting their gold, preparing to buy lies dressed as truth. Tomorrow would bring resolution, one way or another. But tonight, there was only waiting, that peculiar suspension between decision and action, where time seems to slow and every breath becomes deliberate. Our Falconer had learned patience from hawks, but even patience has its limits, and tomorrow those limits would be tested. October 27th arrived, dressed in fog so thick that the castle bells sounded muffled, as if ringing underwater, and our Falconer stood in the Duke's study at dawn, watching the old man write with a hand that trembled not from age, but from suppressed fury. The Duke had received troubling news. General Martinez's regiment was delayed by flooded roads near Segovia. They wouldn't arrive until the following day, long after the counterfeiters completed their transactions. "We proceed anyway," the Duke declared, sealing orders with hot wax. 6 of my gods, plus you and Carlos inside. Not ideal odds, but surprise might balance the scales. The narrator observes that our Falconer felt the peculiar calm that comes when all choices narrow to one path forward. He'd seen it in hawks before the strike. That moment when calculation becomes commitment, when thought transforms into action. He spent the morning making final preparations, but his carefully laid plan shifted when Esperanza began calling from her perch, an unusual vocalization she only made when sensing approaching storms. Yet the sky, though foggy, showed no signs of weather. He went to calm her and found a small leather cylinder tied to her leg, a message that must have been attached while he slept. The note inside was brief, written in Kraft's precise hand. "We know about Carlos. Come alone tonight, or he dies. Bring the Duke's seal and authority to clear our departure." Our falconer burned the message immediately, his mind racing through implications. They'd discovered Carlos's betrayal, but hadn't fled, which meant they still needed something. The Duke's seal would let them pass checkpoints, cross provincial borders without inspection. They were planning to leave tonight with their entire operation, not just the counterfeit notes, but the plates, the devices, everything needed to restart elsewhere. He couldn't tell the Duke. The old man would either forbid him from going or insist on sending soldiers immediately, either action resulting in Carlos's death. Instead, he made his own choice, the kind of decision that separates servants from men who merely serve. Using Esperanza as his messenger, he attached his response to her leg and flew her to the monastery's boundary, knowing they watched. She returned within an hour, terrified but unharmed, carrying Kraft's reply. "Midnight. Come through the north entrance. Any tricks, and the gamekeeper burns with the evidence." The rest of the day passed in strange suspension. He went through normal routines, feeding birds, maintaining equipment, discussing tomorrow's hunt with the Duke's stablemaster, while his mind worked through possibilities. At dusk, he found Isabel in the laundry courtyard and pressed a sealed letter into her hands. "If I don't return by dawn, give this to Father Miguel. He'll know what to do." She gripped his wrist with surprising strength. "You're not going alone." "I have to. It's the only way to save Carlos." "Carlos chose his path." Her voice was fierce, protective. "You don't owe him your life for his mistakes." "No," he agreed, "but I owe myself the attempt. We choose our debts as much as they choose us." The narrator must tell you that she kissed him then, quick and hard, tasting of the mint she'd chewed and the wine she'd been drinking for courage. It was their first kiss, and possibly their last, all the more precious for its brevity. At 11 that night, he entered the fog carrying only what they'd expect: the Duke's seal, letters of passage, and a money purse heavy with gold reales. But he also carried things they wouldn't expect: a tiny vial of oil tucked in his boot, capable of making stone stairs treacherous, and more importantly, his intimate knowledge of how stressed raptors behave when their environment suddenly changes. The monastery loomed through fog like a ship run aground, its broken tower barely visible. The ultrasonic devices were silent. They wanted him to approach. At the north entrance, the young man with the pistol waited, smiling unpleasantly. "The famous falconer. Kraft wants to meet you properly." They descended into the crypt, where the full operation spread before him in lamplight. Carlos knelt in a corner, hands tied, face bloodied, but eyes still defiant. Around him stood 15 men, some working the presses, others packing finished notes into crates. Kraft himself sat at a makeshift desk, examining documents through his spectacles. "Ah, the Birdman," he said in accented Spanish. "I must admit admiration for your detection work. Few would have connected Galton's theories to our practical application." Release Carlos. I've brought what you wanted. Show me. Our falconer produced the Duke's seal and papers, holding them just out of reach. Him first, Kraft laughed. You're hardly in a position to negotiate. He gestured, and two men grabbed our falconer's arms, taking the items by force. But I'm curious, how did you plan to stop us? Surely you knew this was a trap. I knew. Then why come? Because a man's worth is measured by what he'll risk for others, not what he'll gain for himself. Rodrigo Salamanca, the engraver, looked up from his work at these words, something shifting in his hollow eyes. Kraft noticed and sneered. Sentiment, the weakness of your nation. In Germany, we understand that progress requires sacrifice. Whose sacrifice? Yours or others? Before Kraft could answer, a sound cut through the night. Church bells ringing the pattern for fire. Then another church joined, then another, the sound spreading across the countryside like flames themselves. Kraft rushed to the stairs, shouting in German, and in that moment of confusion, our falconer acted. The oil from his boot went onto the stairs, just as three men rushed up to investigate. They fell in a tangle of limbs and curses. Carlos, reading the moment, rolled toward a lamp, knocking it over with his shoulder. Oil spread across straw packing material, igniting instantly. "The plates!" Kraft screamed. "Save the plates!" In the chaos of smoke and shouting, our falconer reached Carlos, cutting his bonds with a blade hidden in his sleeve. Together they fought toward the stairs, but Major Delgado appeared at the top, pistol drawn and aimed. "Going somewhere?" The narrator observes that sometimes salvation comes from unexpected sources. Rodrigo Salamanca, the weak engraver, struck Delgado from behind with a printing plate, the heavy copper dropping the major instantly. "My mother's medical care," he said to our falconer. "The Duke will guarantee it? If you testify, yes." They escaped through smoke and chaos, emerging into fog to find the Duke's guards arriving on horseback, drawn by the church bells, Father Miguel's innovation, using the rural fire warning system to summon help. The battle was brief but vicious. Kraft tried to flee with a case of plates but ran directly into the reinstated ultrasonic devices which Carlos had secretly repaired and reversed, their sound now facing inward. The German fell to his knees, vomiting, incapacitated by his own weapon. By dawn on October 28th, it was finished. 11 counterfeiters captured, including Major Delgado. 4 escaped in the fog, though without plates or equipment. The false notes, nearly 100,000 reales worth, burned in a pyre that could be seen for miles, the smoke carrying the acrid smell of crime destroyed. General Martinez arrived at midday with his regiment, furious at missing the action, but pleased to take credit for the arrests. He questioned everyone, particularly interested in the ultrasonic devices, which he ordered destroyed immediately. "Science should serve man, not terrorize him," he declared, though the narrator suspects he simply feared what he didn't understand. Carlos stood before the Duke that afternoon, expecting judgment. The gamekeeper had betrayed trust, stolen information, aided criminals. By law, he faced prison or worse. The Duke sat silent for long minutes, studying the man who'd served him for 15 years before corruption took root. "Exile," he said finally. "You'll leave Spain within a month. My cousin in Argentina needs men who understand hunting and land management. You'll work his estates for 7 years, sending half your wages back to pay debts owed here." "Your Grace is merciful." "I'm practical. Prison teaches nothing but better criminality. Work might teach you to value what you nearly lost. The interrogations began on October 29th in the castle's Great Hall, transformed into a makeshift court where General Martinez presided with military efficiency while the Duke observed from his elevated chair, gout-swollen foot hidden beneath rich fabric. Our falconer stood to the side, officially there to identify suspects, but actually serving as the Duke's eyes, watching for lies that lawyers might miss. Rodrigo Salamanca testified first, his voice steady despite trembling hands. The engraver revealed the operation's scope, over 50,000 false reales already in circulation, bonds that could have bankrupted 2 provinces, tax stamps that would have diverted fortunes from the crown. He named names, dates, amounts, his memory as precise as his engravings. "My mother suffers from consumption," he concluded. "The treatments cost more than an honest engraver earns in a lifetime. I chose her life over my honor." The narrator observes that the hall fell silent at this, even hardened soldiers understanding such a choice. The Duke's physician, Dr. Marquez, surprised everyone by standing. "I'll treat your mother without charge," he announced. "Consider it investment in rehabilitation." Johannes Kraft proved less cooperative, maintaining that science belonged to whoever could best employ it. "Your backwards nation fears progress," he sneered in heavily accented Spanish. "In 10 years, devices like mine will guard every valuable property in Europe." "Perhaps," General Martinez replied, "but not in Spain. And not by you." The most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source, Major Delgado's aide, a young lieutenant who'd grown disgusted with the corruption he'd witnessed. He produced ledgers hidden in the garrison, documenting bribes, false requisitions, and the systematic looting of provincial resources. The conspiracy reached higher than expected, touching judges in Toledo, merchants in Madrid, even 2 members of the provincial parliament. On October 30th, our falconer was summoned to give his account. He spoke simply, without embellishment, describing his investigation, the discovery of the ultrasonic devices, the counterfeit operation. When asked about Carlos's involvement, he was careful with truth. The gamekeeper was coerced through debts and threats. When offered redemption, he chose it at great personal risk. Yet, he betrayed the Duke's trust initially, General Martinez pressed, as did I, by acting without authority. If we judge every man by his worst moment, we'll find only saints in heaven and devils everywhere else. The Duke coughed, perhaps hiding a smile. "My falconer speaks true. Carlos Fuentes will face exile as decreed. The matter is settled." November arrived with cold rain that turned the roads to mud, delaying the prisoner's transport to Madrid for formal trial. During this time, our falconer found himself elevated in ways that discomforted him. Nobles who'd never acknowledged his existence now sought his opinion. Servants who'd known him for decades suddenly used formal address. Even the birds seemed to sense change, restless in their mews despite his constant care. Isabel understood his unease better than most. "You're the man who caught counterfeiters that fooled everyone else," she said, while they sat in the kitchen garden on November 3rd, watching her children play. "They want to make you a symbol." "I'm a falconer, nothing more." "You were never just that." She threaded her fingers through his, a gesture that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. "But I prefer you as you are. Complicated, careful, kind when you think no one notices." The narrator must note that their courtship, if it could be called that, proceeded with the same patience our falconer applied to training birds. Small gestures, careful approaches, building trust through consistency rather than grand declarations. The castle staff whispered, of course, but the Duke's apparent approval silenced criticism. On November 5th, Carlos departed for Seville, where he'd take ship to Argentina. Our falconer met him at dawn by the stable, bringing a gift, a trained sparrowhawk, one that could hunt the different prey of the New World. "You'll need her more than I will," Carlos said, his voice rough with emotion. "She's not for you, she's for the man you'll become. Feed her well, fly her daily, and remember that trust, once broken, takes years to rebuild, but is worth the effort." They embraced briefly, the awkward gesture of men unaccustomed to displaying affection. Carlos mounted his horse, looked back once, then rode into fog that swallowed him like forgiveness. The trials in Madrid proceeded through November, resulting in 15 convictions, 3 acquittals, and 2 mysterious deaths in custody. Men who knew too much about connections reaching toward the capital. Kraft received 20 years hard labor, though the narrator suspects he'll be quietly deported within 5. His knowledge too valuable for Germany to abandon. Rodrigo Salamanca, in exchange for testimony, received only exile, and now works as an honest engraver in Paris, sending money home for his mother's care. On November 15th, the Duke summoned our falconer for what both knew might be their last substantial conversation. The old man's health had declined rapidly, the excitement of recent events consuming his remaining strength. "The railway company still wants the monastery lands," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "They'll pay well, enough to modernize the estates, perhaps bring prosperity to the villages." "Progress demands sacrifice," as Kraft said, "but not unwilling sacrifice. I've decided to sell, but with conditions. A portion goes to improving workers' cottages, another to establishing a school, and you, my friend, will receive a permanent dwelling and doubled wages. Your grace is generous." "I'm dying," the Duke corrected with sharp honesty. "Fernando will inherit, and he lacks my tolerance for talented servants who exceed their station. This protects you and those you'll protect." Our falconer understood. The cottage would house not just him, but Isabel and her children eventually. The increased wages would provide education, opportunities, the chance for her son to become more than a laborer, her daughter more than a laundress. "There's one more thing," the Duke continued, producing a small leather case. Inside lay a silver whistle on a chain, expertly crafted. "Not ultrasonic, perfectly ordinary, but I thought you should have something to remember this adventure. Sometimes the greatest mysteries have the simplest solutions. But someone must be brave enough to look for them." That evening, Esperanza flew free for the first time since October, soaring over the monastery ruins without fear. The ultrasonic devices had been destroyed, their components scattered and buried. She circled 3 times, calling out in what sounded like triumph, then returned to his glove with the confidence of a creature who'd faced inexplicable terror and survived. Watching her, our falconer reflected on the nature of fear itself, how it could be manufactured, manipulated, used as a weapon or wall, but also how it could be overcome through understanding, patience, and the courage to trust what instinct insisted, despite what reason doubted. The birds had known something was wrong long before humans understood why. Perhaps wisdom lay not in dismissing such warnings, but in learning to interpret them. November's cold settled over Castile like a gray blanket, but in the cottage the Duke had granted him, warmth gathered. Isabel brought her few possessions that afternoon, her children racing through rooms that seemed palatial compared to their previous quarters. The boy immediately claimed the small loft, perfect for watching stars through a gap in the roof tiles. The girl chose the corner near the fireplace, where light was best for drawing. "It's too much," Isabel protested, though her eyes shone with tears she wouldn't shed. "It's exactly enough," he replied, and for the first time in 8 years since his wife's death, he felt the possibility of home as more than just shelter. The narrator observes that happiness, like trust, rebuilds slowly, one small moment layered upon another, until suddenly the structure stands complete, surprising in its solidity. Our falconer had solved the mystery of San Isidro, but in doing so had uncovered something more valuable: the truth that isolation, like fear, could be overcome by patience and the willingness to risk believing in tomorrow. April of 1885 brought warmth that coaxed green from winter bare branches and filled the air with the urgent business of nesting birds. Our falconer stood at the edge of what had been San Isidro Monastery, watching workmen dismantle stones that had stood for 300 years, each one destined for the railway bridge that would span the Tagus Valley by summer's end. The narrator observes that he felt no sadness at this destruction. Buildings, like fears, sometimes need to be torn down before something better can rise. 6 months had passed since that night of fire and chaos. The Duke had died in December, quietly, asking at the end only to hear Esperanza's hunting cry one last time. Our falconer had brought her to the window, and she'd called, as if understanding, a fierce proclamation that seemed to ease the old man's passing. Don Fernando now ruled the estate, but true to his uncle's provisions, he'd honored the cottage grant and wage increase, though he rarely acknowledged the falconer's existence. A letter from Carlos had arrived that morning, water-stained from its ocean journey but legible. He wrote of Argentina's vast spaces, of hawks that rode thermals higher than Spanish birds ever flew, of redemption found in hard work and distance from old temptations. "The sparrowhawk hunts well here," he'd written. "She's teaching me patience I never had before. Perhaps that was your intention all along." "Papa! Papa!" Isabel's son, for the boy had taken to calling him that since the February day they'd formally married, came running through the construction debris, holding something carefully in cupped hands. "Look what I found." It was one of Kraft's ultrasonic whistles, tarnished but intact, missed in the November destruction. The boy had already figured out its basic function, making the estate's dogs whine with experimental tweets. Our falconer took it gently, remembering the terror it had caused, the mystery it had created. "What does it do?" the boy asked. "It makes sounds we can't hear, but animals can. It frightened them." "Why would someone want to frighten animals?" Our falconer considered the question, kneeling to meet the boy's eyes. "Sometimes people use fear to protect things they shouldn't have. They think if others are too scared to look closely, their secrets stay safe." "But Esperanza wasn't too scared. She told you something was wrong." "She did. Animals often know truths that humans miss. We just have to learn to listen." The boy nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Can I keep it? I promise not to scare things with it." "I want to study it, understand how it works." Looking at this child who might become anything, scholar, craftsman, perhaps even a falconer, our narrator sees the future spreading like dawn across the Spanish hills. Knowledge itself isn't dangerous, he told the boy. It's what we choose to do with it that matters. They walked back toward the cottage together, passing through what had been the monastery's garden, now wild with spring growth. Isabel was there with her daughter, gathering herbs that grew nowhere else, remnants of Brother Tomas's ancient experiments. She looked up at their approach, smiling in that way that still surprised him, open, unguarded, trusting. "The railway foreman says they'll be done by month's end," she reported. "Then this will all be grazing land again." "Or perhaps something else," our falconer mused, watching his stepdaughter sketch the demolition with remarkable accuracy for a 9-year-old. "The Duke left funds for a school. This land is central to 3 villages. A school where the monastery stood?" Isabel considered this. "Some would say it's cursed ground." "Then we'll prove them wrong. Education is its own kind of exorcism." That afternoon he flew Esperanza over the changing landscape, watching her soar with the confidence of a creature that had faced its worst fear and overcome it. She hunted brilliantly, taking 2 rabbits and a partridge with economy of motion that spoke of absolute trust between falcon and falconer. Each successful strike was a small victory over the terror that had nearly broken her. Father Miguel visited that evening, bringing wine and news from the wider world. The trials had concluded in Madrid, with most conspirators imprisoned or exiled. Major Delgado had been stripped of rank and imprisoned for 10 years. The provincial governor, implicated but never proven guilty, had retired to his estates in disgrace. "Evil faced, evil defeated," the priest said with satisfaction. "Temporarily," our falconer corrected. "There will always be those who use fear as a tool, who corrupt trust for gain. We simply stopped one group." Such pessimism from a man newly married with a growing family. Realism, Father, but also hope. Each time we face such challenges, we learn. The boy found one of the whistles today. Instead of fearing it, he wants to understand it. That's progress of the truest kind. The priest smiled. "You've become philosophical in your success." "I've had time to think. When you spend your life training predators, you learn that fear and respect are close cousins. The key is knowing which serves you and which enslaves you." As night fell, the family gathered for the evening meal, simple food made special by company. Isabel's children chattered about their day, their plans, their dreams that seemed suddenly possible. The cottage, once shelter for a solitary man nursing old grief, now rang with life's insistence on continuing despite all obstacles. Later, while Isabel put the children to bed, our falconer sat outside watching stars emerge in the clear spring sky. The monastery's tower had blocked this view for centuries. Now, nothing stood between him and the infinite. He thought of Brother Tomas, hanging himself rather than face the Inquisition. Of craft, using science to create fear. Of all the ways humans complicated simple truths. A hand touched his shoulder. Isabel, come to sit beside him as had become their custom. "You're thinking deep thoughts again." "I'm thinking that mysteries aren't always what they seem. We searched for a ghost and found counterfeiters. We expected supernatural terror and discovered ultrasonic science. The truth was both simpler and more complex than anyone imagined." "Like most truths," she agreed, leaning against him with comfortable familiarity. The narrator observes that they sat in companionable silence, watching the first bats emerge for their nocturnal hunt. These creatures, navigated by sounds humans couldn't hear, living in a world of echoes and frequencies beyond common perception. Perhaps Kraft had been partly right. There were communications beyond human hearing, but they weren't divine or demonic, merely different, part of nature's vast conversation that continued whether humans listened or not. A letter had come from the Duke's lawyers that morning, one he hadn't yet shared with Isabel. The railway company wanted to hire him as a consultant, using his knowledge of local wildlife to minimize disruption as they built through the province. The pay was substantial, enough to ensure both children could receive proper education, perhaps even university if they showed aptitude. It meant change, travel, time away from the mews he'd tended for decades. But the birds would remain, cared for by the assistant he'd been training, and he would return to fly them on weekends. Progress and tradition need not be enemies if approached with wisdom. "Change is coming," he said finally. "Change already came," Isabel replied. "We survived it." In the distance, an owl called, that ancient sound unchanged since before monasteries rose or fell, before railways or ultrasonic whistles, before humans learned to write their fears and hopes in stone and steel. Esperanza, hooded and content on her perch, shifted slightly at the sound but showed no distress. She'd learned the difference between real danger and echo, between threats that required flight and sounds that merely demanded attention. Our falconer understood that he'd learned the same lesson. Fear was information, nothing more or less. It could be manufactured, manipulated, used to control or liberate, but ultimately, like the falcons he trained, humans could choose whether to let fear rule them or whether to rise above it, riding the thermals of possibility toward horizons that beckoned with promise rather than threat. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, indifferent to human struggles, and our falconer found comfort in that indifference. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. It always did. But tonight there was peace and purpose, and the quiet satisfaction of a mystery solved by patience, observation, and the wisdom to trust what others dismissed. Sometimes, the narrator concludes, that's all any of us can hope for. The chance to face our fears with open eyes and find, waiting on the other side, not emptiness, but understanding.